world's highest paid woman executive. She tried to retire at times, and Lord Vestey came to Superior to convince her to go back to work. There's at least one, maybe two times when steamships were setting on the coast, and she was the only passenger when they had to rush her someplace in the world to look after the Vestey affairs.
I was born in 1875 in Monroe, Wisconsin. The same year I was born, Papa found out that he had consumption. Consumption was not curable. The only recommendation they had was to move to somewhere that had a hot, dry climate. Papa heard about a new little town just being started down on the Republican River in Nebraska, and so he rode the train as far as Edgar and then walked the rest of the way to Superior, Nebraska. When he got there, he found out that the businessmen that were in town had built a bridge across the river so that the rich farmers in Jewell County could get to the railhead in Edgar. Papa thought that was a great plan. And so in 1878, Mama, Papa, my brother Louis, who was 3 years older than I am, and I moved to Superior.
Evelene Brodstone's father was one of the first merchants to come to Superior. He brought his young family with him, and unfortunately he did not live many years, so there's not a lot of Brodstone store history to talk about.
I still remember getting off the train in Edgar and riding in a buckboard to Superior, and it was just mile after mile of grass. There was not a tree to be seen. Superior wasn't very big in those days, about 150 people. We bought a farm on the north edge of Superior, and Papa built a store to do a business, and they asked him to be a member of the first village board, which made Papa very proud to be started the founding of this town. Unfortunately, Papa's health did not improve, and he died in 1881. When he died, Mama gave the city of Superior part of our farm to start the Evergreen Cemetery on the north edge of town, and Papa was buried there. Mama was Norwegian, and she was very thrifty, and so we had all the things we needed, but we didn't have all the things we wanted. So I continued to study so that I was able to graduate from high school when I was only 14. I was the youngest one to ever graduate from Superior High School. I was not the valedictorian, but I was the youngest.
Evelyn was a member of the first high school graduating class, Superior High School. Probably attended school in a little building that sits where the Crest Theater sits now.
And we had our graduation ceremony at the Briggs Opera House. We decorated it with flowers and brought in chairs, and there were 8 in my graduating class. And then I went to Iowa to a business college there for a few years, and then came back to Superior. But I just knew there was something else out there for me, something I was supposed to do. And so I asked Mama if I could go to Chicago. And the people that had started the Briggs Opera House had moved to Chicago. She said if they'd let me stay with them, I could go there. And so I wrote to them, and they agreed that I could stay at their house. So I rode the train to Chicago, and I started looking for work. I found a job at the Vestey Cold Storage Company, and they said that I didn't have much experience and I was very young, so they would let me work for 2 weeks. And at the end of that time, they would tell me whether I had the job or not. And I said, I don't have much time. I'll work till noon. You should be able to tell by then whether you like me or not. And they did. They liked my work, and I got hired. I made $12 a week. That was enough money I was able to send half of it home to Mama every week. As secretary at the Vestey Cold Storage, I would take dictation, type up letters, but one day Robert no, Loudon. Mr. Loudon called for his personal secretary to come in and help him, and his secretary was gone, and so I said I would go. And so I went in and I took dictation, and he liked what I did, and he asked me to be his personal secretary. And so my salary went to $20 a week. Samuel Vestey lived in London, and he had a small butcher shop. But the Industrial Revolution was going on, and all of the people were moving from the farms to the town. And so he knew they needed another source of meat to feed all those people. So he sent his son, William, who was only 17 at the time, to the United States to find another source of meat. Of course, he went to Chicago. And what he found out was that the people in the United States are kind of picky. They only like the choice cuts, the steak, the roast. And they were just throwing away the other parts, like the heart, the liver, the kidneys. And he was able to buy them very inexpensively. And he ground them up and made a special meat and sent it back, and canned it, sent it back to England, and they loved it. And that's how the cold storage company began. William was very intelligent. He was like the brains of the organization, and his brother Edmund was the one that would take care of the details, and Edmund was the one that was in charge of the Chicago plant. So one day I was in the board meeting taking dictation, and I just offered a suggestion, and they looked at me like, "You're the secretary. Why are you offering suggestions?" And then they realized that I had really good ideas. And then they asked me if I would be a member of the board. And 2 years later, when they decided to move the company headquarters to London, they asked me if I would be chief auditor of the plant there in Chicago. And then they asked me if I would come to London and work for them there. So I moved to London, and I started working for the Vesteys. William Vestey had other big ideas. He heard about a new process called freeze drying. And so he went down to South America, and first they built a refrigerated ship and a refrigerated storage facility in England. Then he went to South America, and he purchased a bunch of partridges, because what he found was that the people in England love partridges, and he froze them and he shipped them back to England, and it was very successful. Because in South America, they had lots and lots of extra food and not very many people. So he could buy the food inexpensively. And then he shipped it back to England, where he could sell it for a good profit. That's how William made his second fortune. And then he had a plant in China. In China, we had an egg production company. If you've ever tried to ship an egg, it's very difficult. But the head of our China plant said, "What if we break the eggs and whip it all together and freeze it and ship it back?" And so they started doing that. And that plant also was very successful. The Chinese people didn't trust English money, so they didn't really want paid in money. They wanted trinkets that they could trade. And William was able to buy those very inexpensively. And that's how William made his third fortune. By the time he was 37, he could have retired and never worked another day in his life. But of course, he was much too ambitious to do that. So in England, I started working for the company. In the early 1900s, I had to travel to Riga, Russia. They were having a revolution there, and our plant was having lots of issues. And so eventually I got on a train, and I got to Riga. I traveled with another man in our company. It was very scary, because the Russian guards would get on and they'd go through all of our stuff, and we, of course, didn't understand what they were saying. But we finally got there, and I said, "I am so late. I have so much work to do. Just take my luggage onto the hotel, and I'm going to go right to work." And so I went to work, and pretty soon they came running in and they said, "You won't believe what happened." And I said, "What?" They said, "Well, they just blew up your hotel. So you lost all your possessions." That was one time when it paid to go to work. So I traveled all around the world. I went to every country. I eventually spoke 17 different languages. Not fluently, but enough to do business.
And she traveled the world. She was in Russia at the time of the Communist Revolution, protecting their affairs. She's in China. She wasn't afraid to go to the hot spots and try to cool the waters, cool the fires around the Vestey investments.
One time, a man in our company stole some money, and he went to South Africa, and no one was going to do anything. And I said, that's not right. So I followed him. And he then traveled to the United States, so I followed him there. And I was able to find him, and I was able to get the money back for our company. You know, you just have to do what's right. People didn't always like having me for boss because I believed in working till the work was done. We didn't have set hours. You'd come early in the morning and you didn't go home till you were done. Some of the employees didn't like that. I also couldn't tolerate alcohol. Drinking just ruined so many lives, and so I was very strong against alcohol. In 1914, I was tired of traveling all over, so I decided to retire and move back to Superior. I always loved Superior. Mama and my brother Louis were both there. And so Mama was, we bought a summer home, and we lived there, but we also bought, where Papa's store was, we decided to build an apartment upstairs. And so we hired Mr. Amberson to come to England to learn how to build fireplaces, because no one in the United States knew how to build proper fireplaces like they did in England. And so he came and he built 2 fireplaces in our new apartment. And my brother Louis lived at the front, and Mom and I lived at the back. I also, they wanted a new park, and so I gave them some money for a park. They wanted me to run for city council or mayor, and I said no, I didn't want to do that. I did buy a car. You could buy any color car you wanted, as long as you wanted black, because they were all black, and I never could tell my car from anybody else's. And so I just bought some red paint and painted my back tires red. It was really nice. I could always spot my car very easily. They thought I was a little eccentric, but it worked really well. Mom had tried for years to keep the hospital going in Superior. You know, hospitals are very important, and she would have us go door to door. There was a hospital on Main Street. It would only have like 8 patients at a time, but we would go to door and collect things for the hospital. So I was home and they said, would you go collect some things? And I said, well, what will you accept? And they said, we'll take anything they want to give us. And so I went, and this lady said she had this old feather mattress. I was like, I don't know what they'll do with it because it looked terrible. But I put it on the top of my car. And I went back to where the women were gathered, and I said, oh, all they had was this old feather mattress. And they said, well, that's really good. They said, we cut that open and we take the feathers out and we make new pillows. And I said, well, here, I'll help you. So I grabbed a knife and I split that feather mattress open, and feathers flew everywhere. I didn't understand that you make a little slit and work the feathers through when you're filling the pillowcase. After that, they wouldn't let me help with that anymore. I was the treasurer for the semi-pro baseball team that was in Superior. Mama thought it was very inappropriate for a woman to travel with the baseball team, but I always had another woman with me, and I decided it would be a fun thing to do.
When she would come back to Superior, she would be active in community affairs. There was a little problem here with playing baseball on Sunday. It was against the rules. So she was part of the group that went south into Kansas and played ball in Kansas. And when the game was over, they were tried to come back into Nebraska, and they were met by the Douglas County Sheriff for illegally having a ball game. But the game was in Kansas. It was legal to play ball in Kansas on Sunday.
They wouldn't let us have games on Sunday. And I knew that the only way we could make a profit was to let people come to games on Sunday. And so we lined it all up. It was those Methodists. They were against Sunday baseball. So we lined it all up, and we brought in a semi-pro team, and we advertised, and people came on the train from everywhere to see this ball game. And the first game was a local team, and that was fine. But as soon as that semi-pro team started, here came the Methodists marching down the street with the sheriff to arrest us for having a game on Sunday. But we had outsmarted him because we had cars waiting, and we just drove the team across the state line into Kansas, and we finished our game there, and people followed us. It wasn't long after that that they started having baseball games on Sunday all the time, but we didn't get to finish that game in Superior. Later that year, Adolf Hitler started causing trouble in Europe. William sent me a cable saying that he wanted me to come back. And he had gotten the contract to feed all the Allied troops. And so I went back and he said, this is what you need to do. He said, you need to go to South America and set up a plant there. So I traveled to South America and I purchased a $20 million plant and I got it up and running. I went back to England. He said, it's just not enough. We need you to go to Australia. So I traveled to Australia and I couldn't go the normal way because the German submarines were sinking ships. So I had to go to the United States, get on a train, cross the United States, then get on a ship and go to Australia. I traveled to the interior of Australia. We had processing plants at Sydney and Melbourne, but we needed to set up the ranches to produce more sheep and cattle. And so I traveled to the interior. I was the only white woman on the trip, but I was able to negotiate the lease of millions of acres of land. We processed it, we sent it back to England, and they were able to feed the Allied troops. And after that, William became a member of the House of Lords and became Lord Vestey. So I retired again, moved back to Superior. In 1918, I got a cable from William, and he said our plant in China was having trouble, and would I come and help? And I said, no, I'm not going. Well, he came to Superior and stayed a few days, and when he left, so did I. So China was also having a war, and it was very intimidating to go there because we didn't know if we were going to be able to escape alive or not. But I was able to finish up the business. We had a ship waiting, and we were able to get out of there. But while I was there, everywhere I traveled, I sent trinkets and mementos back to the city library. I didn't think that there were young people in Superior would be able to see all the things I've seen or travel all the places I was able to travel. And I wanted them to just have a taste of what was out there so that hopefully someday they too would want to go travel. And so while I was in China, I purchased a Canon and I shipped the Canon back and they put it in the city park. I also sent things back from Australia. There was a rope made out of hair. There was a boomerang. While I was in one of the villages, the mailman came and he couldn't find who he was sending the letter to. And it was actually like just a stick of wood with different markings on it. And I was able to get that and sent that back. I sent back a piece of the Great Wall.
Evelyn had for many years, sent gifts to the grade school students in Superior. The fourth grade class would get a gift every year from Evelyn. My mother proudly displayed, for as long as she lived, a little tin container, a cup of some kind that I'm not sure what it was for, but it was on her shelf of knickknacks. Oh, Evelene Brodstone, Lady Vestey, gave me that when I was in the fourth grade. It's now over in the Knuckles County Museum, along with other things that she collected. The basement of the Carnegie Library had a museum that was filled with things that Lady Vestey sent back from her world travels to her hometown. As a youngster, I remember how much fun it was to get the librarian to unlock the door and let me go down there and look around at all the things, including the hat, the bird hat that's got stuffed birds. They look kind of like, we'd call them sparrows. They're probably something more exotic than sparrows, but got these stuffed birds on this hat, someplace she acquired.
In 1918, then I retired back to Superior again. In 1923, William's wife, Sarah, passed away. His wife had been kind of an invalid. They had 4 sons, and at the birth of their last son, she became physically and mentally imbalanced, and she was not able to leave their home. And so when William would come to London on business, which he did a lot, I was able to, he would come over to our house sometimes, or we would go to the theater, or we would do things together. And when he brought his sons with him, I would go shopping with them and help with that. And so through the years, we became really good friends, as well as business partners, as well as working together in the business. And so in 1923, Sarah died. And in 1924, I got a cable from William that our plant down in Rio de Janeiro was on fire. And would I go down and help finish that up? That's not true. In 1924, I got a cable from William saying that Edmund was down in South America and he'd fallen and broken his leg. And would I go down and help finish up the business and help him get back to England? And so, of course, I did. I got there, we finished up, we got on the ship, we went back to England. And when we got there, there was William with his arms full of roses, and he asked me to marry him. And I said what any 49-year-old unmarried woman would say, I have to go home and ask Mama first. And so I went back to Superior and I asked Mama what I should do. And she said, well, you know, he is the richest man in England and the 7th richest man in the world. And if you marry him, you'll never have to worry about money. And I said, but I'm already making $250,000 a year. I was the highest paid woman executive of that time. I said, money is really not that important to me. And she said, well, if you marry him, you might be the only small-town Nebraska girl to ever become a member of English nobility. And I said, oh, I really don't care about that either. And she said, well, I guess what really matters is, do you love him? And I said, I think I've loved him for a long time. And she said, then I think you should marry him. And so I cabled him and I said yes, and he came to Superior, and we had a little gathering of friends down at the Bon Ton Cafe. We decided to get married in New York City, but before we left town, Mama was worried about our downtown apartment because the steps were so steep, and she was afraid if there was a fire, she wouldn't be able to get out. And so William and I drove her around town, and we let her pick any house she wanted. And she found the perfect house, and luckily it was for sale. And we purchased that house for Mama. She had been with me so much through the years and had been such a support no matter where I was. I was so excited to be able to do something to pay her back. So we got on the train to go to New York City. Unfortunately, Mama's health, she didn't feel good, and so she turned around and came back. But William and I were married at the little church around the corner in New York, and then we got on the ship to go back to London. On the way, we got a cable that we were having plant trouble down in South America. And so when we docked, William went to work, and so did I. I was on a ship going down to South America. Business always came first. No matter what was going on, you had to take care of business. And when I was in South America, I got a cable from my brother Louis, and he said that Mama was packing, was so excited about moving, and she got uremic poisoning, and they took her to the hospital, but she died. And so William came to get me, and we came back to Superior, and we said, what could we do for Mama? And all those years, she had worked to keep the hospital going. And so we decided that where our summer home was, we gave them the land, and they moved the summer home down to 2nd Street. And they built a new, modern 23-bed hospital that opened in 1928. Unfortunately, when they had the grand opening, I was finally on my honeymoon, and so I didn't get to be here for the grand opening. But my friend Willa Cather, she and I were childhood friends, and we kept in touch through correspondence through the years. And when someone wrote to her and told her that Mama had passed away, they asked her if she would write a poem to put on a plaque in the hospital. And so she just sat down and started writing. She brought across the seas a high courage, a warm heart, a rich relish of life. It was perfect. And they put this poem on a plaque with Mama's picture and hung it in the lobby of the hospital. We went back to England after that, and William never believed in paying somebody to do something you could do yourself. So we always had our own insurance companies, and we decided then instead of paying to go on ships, we just build our own. And so we built the Arendor Star. It was a perfect ship. She was white with a scarlet ribbon around her. She had tennis courts, swimming pool, quoit pitches where you could play. She had a ballroom, all kinds of wonderful food. She would give tours 2 or 3 times a year. And William was 66 when we got married, and so he was ready to slow down. So his brothers and his son had kind of taken over the business. And so we traveled a lot. We loved to go down to the French Riviera. We had a home down there with the Alps in the back and the Mediterranean Sea out in front. We spent a lot of time down there. It was nice on the Arendor Star because all your things were there, and you would dock and go for a day trip, and you could see all kinds of things and then come back and have all your things there waiting for you when you got home. One time the Arendora Star was in California, and one of our friends said that she knew about 100 Nebraska people that lived in California. And so we invited all of them to come have tea on the Arendora Star. And so they did. Unfortunately, I wasn't there that time, but they got to come and see the ship and see all the things that were on it. We also had a home in England. It was called Kingswood. Kingswood was in the middle of England. It was 4 stories high. It was kind of a yellow brick. Also had a ballroom, extensive gardens out and back. My boudoir, my bedroom was 80 feet long. We had a library. It was really fun to read because one of the turrets, when you climbed up in it, you could see all of London, and it was lined with books. So you could go up there and sit and read and enjoy the view. And it was surrounded by bushes and trees, so it was like secluded. You didn't feel like you're in the middle of London, but it was really close to work. But London is wet and damp a lot of the time. And so we would travel on the Arendora Star to get away from all the rain. In 1936, I got word that my brother Louis was sick. And so we came back to Superior again, and unfortunately he died. And so we bought land for a bird sanctuary and a city park. I wanted people to have a place to go where there were trees. I remembered coming when there were no trees, and I wanted the city to have a place where you could always find trees. And so we gave them money for this park and bird sanctuary, and they asked if they could put the football field there. And we said yes. And so they did, and they called it the Lewis Brodstone Memorial Field. Then we went back to England. World War II was starting. Hitler was making moves, and so it was challenging. We knew Kingswood would be a target. They asked if they could use Kingswood. They gave out gas masks there. And so we moved all the furniture on the main floor, and they brought in all these gas masks. Then they used it as a distribution point. Unfortunately, they had no gas masks for pets or for young children. And so they recommended that the parents and owners of these pets take them out of London because they knew London would be a target. And so we did that. They practiced parachute sailing, hot air balloon training in our backyard. So William and I had to move out of Kingswood because we knew it would be a target during the air raid sirens. After Hitler conquered most of Europe, it was basically England fighting alone. Our friends wanted us to move back to the United States, but we didn't want to leave England when she was in trouble. The Arendora Star, they painted her battleship gray, and they put 1,700 prisoners of war and internees on the Arendora Star. In 1930, she set sail, and that's not right. Sorry, you'll have to cut that out. It can't be 1930s. We're talking about the war. Okay, so she set sail, and she was one day out. Captain Moulton, who was the captain of the Arendora Star, said, "You can't send us out there with no protection because the Germans are sinking ships." And they said, "You're on your own." And so they set sail, and William's nephew was one of the captains on the ship. And one day they got hit by a torpedo. The prisoners that were down below found that they had put barbed wire to keep them from escaping, and so they couldn't even get from one level to another. The ones that were up on top, they had all the life rafts hooked down with a special tool, and they couldn't find the tool to release them. They all had life jackets, but the lifeboats, they had taken out the oars and all of the provisions that were supposed to be in it. Well, they got the lifeboats in the water. At the end, the ones in the bottom were just throwing themselves on the barbed wire trying to break through, and they were unable to. And the ones on top at the end were jumping into the water, but it was freezing cold, and it was covered by a coat of oil, which had come to the surface when the Arendora Star sank. It sank in an hour. And so the men in the boats were paddling with their hands as quick as they could to get away, but while trying to rescue those that were still in the water. The help came rather quickly, but it was so hard to get the men out of the water. And so out of the 1,700, about half of them perished that day. After that, they never named another ship the Arendor Star. And they no longer ship prisoners of war or internees out of England. So the battle for England was on. Hitler would fly his planes over. The RAF did the best they could, shooting them down, but some of them would still get through. And so the air raid sirens would go off, and we all prepared our basements so that we would have a place to go. And it was cold and it was damp, and you'd go down there at night and you'd get woken up every night. And one day a friend of ours was driving and a bomb dropped right in front of his car. So you just never knew when your time would come. There were fires everywhere. And in 1940, William got sick and he died. So I'm in England. I have lots of friends. I'm living in a little cottage. Kingswood did get bombed, blew out all the windows, all the skylights, destroyed all the gardens. Luckily, we weren't there, but so now I'm living in this little cottage with my friends, and in 1941, I died, of May of 1941. So my wish was to be returned to Superior. But I was cremated, and they kept my ashes there until 1946 when it was safe to return me to Superior. So Mama, Papa, my brother Louis, and I are all buried in the Evergreen Cemetery on the original farm that we purchased when we moved here. My English estate, which was worth millions of dollars, went to William and his sons. My American estate, which was worth about $250,000, went to the hospital. And they are still getting some funds from that today to help maintain the hospital. I traveled everywhere around the world, and I never found a place that I liked better than coming home to Superior, Nebraska.